been a while since we tackled a Resonator guitar. This is a National. Gets a lot of play in the hands of Jitterbug James from the Vaudevillian. This is not an ancient instrument. This is only a couple of years old, but they do a lot of gigs. And this is one of the modern National models that's designed to quickly take on a patina from the chemicals exuding from one's body, or precious bodily fluids. And this has been augmented with a rather nice and distinctive cover plate made by a company specializing in such things called Steel and Gravel. They do a whole range of nifty designs. This has got little ladybugs and music notes. I think that's pretty cool. So Jitterbug plays slide and fingerstyle 20s and 30s ragtime, hokum, Piedmont style blues, good time music. This is a guitar he really only wants to use for fingerstyle. He doesn't want to play slide on this one. And I believe it still has the factory setup. We haven't lowered this, which on these guys can be a little high for fingerstyle work, because it's usually in the region of maybe 8/64ths, 3.2 millimeters, 125 thousandths. And he wants it a little bit lower. So this is basically a setup, but there are a few tricks to this on these guitars. We want to refine this, but we do have to be careful because we're dealing with pretty tight tolerances in terms of break angle for the strings. The break angle tends to be pretty low on these as a rule, and there's a reason for that. Because we're exciting a spun aluminum cone, too much downward pressure can kind of overload it, causing it, basically the sound dies. What about a neck reset, I hear you saying? Well, yes, it's possible. I've done them. The necks in these have an extended arm that travels all the way through the body and presses against the tail block, where it's held in place by the strap button. It's essentially the same method as in an old-time banjo. There are also wedges which press against the cone well between the stick and the metal to hold it in place. Resetting is not like your standard flat-top guitar. There's no sandpaper pulling to change the angle. You end up taking the neck out and then just using a chisel to cut away material from the heel and tip the neck back, which also sometimes necessitates removing material from the stick and changing the wedge angle and such. You need sharp tools and confidence, and it's not an inexpensive job. It's major surgery. So in instances like this, most people will try and get what they can from lowering the saddle, which costs much less, of course. But again, balancing act between comfort and tone. We'll get some numbers, and this is what I expect. It's about 8/64ths on the bass side, and just about the same, maybe a little bit less on the treble. Neck relief feels a bit much. There's quite a bit of bounce in there. And yeah, it's about 13 thousandths, which is more than you want. I think you want a straighter neck on this. And that's something we should change before we start playing around with the saddle height, because we want a good accurate picture of what the real action is. So let's adjust the truss rod. These take a 1/8 inch key, which is pretty small for these things. Of course, the vintage Triolians did not have adjustable truss rods in them. That feels fairly loose to me. Let's give it a few turns. Okay, basically halved the relief. We're down to about 6 thousandths, which I'm happy with. The action has come down slightly, not a whole lot, just under 8/64ths and right on 7/64ths. I'll keep the strings attached to the headstock end because there's going to be a lot of on and off. We'll take the tail piece off. And the cover plate. Now, if you ever have occasion to do this, you be careful, please, because these screws are going into very thin sheet steel. There's not a whole lot of thread there, so don't strip them out. Okay, this is the cone, which is sitting inside the well. This is the biscuit, a biscuit bridge with a maple saddle. This is extremely delicate. You have to treat this thing with exceptional care because it just wants to dent and crush. And yeah, so it's got to be resting in a safe place at all times when it's out of the guitar. Here we have the interior. You'll see this is the integral, I'm not sure what we call it. In a banjo it would be called the dowel stick, even though they're frequently not round. And here are the wedges which hold it against the underside of the well. They're screwed in place. In older ones they were hammered in with a little brad or nail. And inside there are supports which run underneath this stick, and there are little circular bolsters which press against the back of the body. So it's kind of interesting system. I'm putting the cone back in place, and I'm going to screw on the tailpiece again and string it up because I want to take a measurement with it under tension. Yeah, I hope you can see just how shallow the angle is, the break angle over the bridge. There is a magic number, and it's about 6 degrees. Anything less than that and the strings start to vibrate against the top of the bridge, and you end up with a weird sort of sitar effect and insufficient pressure down on the cone. Things start to get aberrant. So I'm actually measuring this with my protractor, and it turns out the angle we have is about 6.5 degrees. So we're fairly close to, you know, the magic number. That can also change slightly if the tailpiece is resting against the cover plate. That can actually push upwards slightly, robbing us of even more break angle. What happens if there's insufficient angle? Well, I've modified a number of these guitars to get away with not doing a neck reset in the past by cutting off the front portion of the tailpiece. I wouldn't do it on a vintage one, obviously, but these things, the replacements are about 25 bucks. They're not tremendously expensive. So I'll cut off this little bump area here, which pitches the strings up slightly, going to just in front of where the strings are inserted, but leaving enough of the lip there that they're not going to crack through or something. And that will lower us a degree or two. I'm going to see if I can try and remove this saddle. This is a compensated design. This is a more modern, which actually has a sort of wavy profile. I think they've started being a little more friendly to the repair people. Vintage ones are usually glued in, and it's a tight fit. So they don't often want to come out. There's also a screw on the underside which holds the biscuit in place, and sometimes that screw can travel all the way through into the saddle slot and actually bury itself into the saddle proper. So I'm just going to loosen that a little bit. Again, being very careful. Take a few turns. That should be sufficient. And I'm not going to okay, very nice. Thank you, National people. Yeah, that's going to come out. Which means I can work on it in relative safety. So I'm going to start off by marking a point a 32nd of an inch below the level of the original string slot on the bass side. And likewise on the treble. This instrument has a radiused fingerboard. Vintage models usually don't, they'll be flat. I'm going to use a 16-inch radius. This one actually has a compound radius. I think it's like 12 to 16. But 16 will get us in the ballpark. Connecting those outside dots. The top of this saddle has some drill marks in it, drilled from the back side to help with intonation and basically to thin down the contact point for the strings, to make it narrower and less likely to hang up or buzz. We might end up going through that, in which case, you know, I'm just going to file from behind and approximate the same distance, which is probably about, I'm guessing 1.5 millimeters. Yeah. Use my gauged nut files and bring the slots down to the pencil line. I'm going to plane off some of the excess material off the top of the slots. We don't need them buried that deeply. I will leave enough to capture them because Mr. Jitterbug there is quite animated in his performances, acrobatic, and plays with fervor. So There should be a little bit of an indentation to hold the string. And I have indeed gone deeper than some of those relief grooves, so I'm going to file those back a bit as well. This is a small tapered circular file. We're strung back up and I'll measure the results, and we are right on 6 degrees. Even rusty guitars need polishing. Okay, we're all set. This is a pretty typical case. I find that if you get one of these things with factory action and try and take it down as low as it'll go and maintain that 6 degree angle, you end up with about 6/64 action height, which is a 25% reduction. Definitely discernible. You'll feel the difference. Not as low as some would like, in which case we're into cutting parts of the tailpiece off, or as I said, doing the neck reset. But most people will be comfortable with this, and at that action you can still play slide, you know, if you're not terribly heavy-handed. Very nice guitar.